Hello everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the brand new M Night Shyamalan film, Trap. This movie stars Josh Hartnett, Hayley Mills, Alison and Saleka Shyamalan, and I was extremely excited for this movie because I am a massive M Night Shyamalan film, and I think my favorite part about his films is the fact that it really is a gamble going into them because you never really know what you're going to get walking out of the theater. Are you going to get a really great, mystery thriller? Are you going to get something that's ridiculously over the top and hilarious, both unintentionally so? Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be good? You truly have no idea what you're going to walk into. And then also you have the whole idea of a Shyamalan twist and what you can play with in the story of any one of his films. And I think what we have here, coming from somebody who is maybe just a little bit biased of being, a massive M Night Shyamalan fan, as much as I love some of his recent films, I think that this one is truly one of his better ones in the past couple of years because I think it has it all. I think this movie has incredibly tense sequences. I think this movie is incredibly funny, both intentionally so and also maybe a little unintentionally so. It has the worst dialogue ever because, of course, it is a Shyamalan movie and he cannot for the life of him write good dialogue, but at the same time there's a certain charm to that, especially if you are a fan of M Night Shyamalan. And so this movie is just wild in so many different ways, and I cannot wait to talk about this movie. So of course we will be getting into spoilers for Trap, so if you have not seen this movie, it's out in theaters. If you're a fan of Shyamalan, let's just jump into this. So what is this film about? Well, essentially follows Josh Hartnett's character who is taking his young daughter to a Lady Raven concert played by Saleka Shyamalan. And, I'll get into Saleka Shyamalan in a second here, but I do think you can say that the entire movie is kind of an advertisement for her as a singer, which, to be fair, she's a really great performer. I really loved all the music that she had in this film, but she also had a much larger role in this movie than I was expecting. So I'll get into her in a second because I think she was one of my favorite parts in the entire film. But the basic premise at hand is essentially you have Josh Hartnett with his daughter, and he learns pretty quickly the fact that this entire concert is a giant trap to catch the butcher, who is a serial killer who has been chopping people up for a very long time. The FBI is on his case, and they figured out that he was going to be at this concert, and they're going to find some way to check every single male that's in their 30s to 50s and try to figure out who the butcher is inside of this concert. And as we learned in the trailer and at the very beginning of this movie, Josh Hartnett is the killer. He is the butcher. And so a lot of the fun of this movie is watching this character kind of maneuver around the situation with, the clunkiest dialogue ever. But in general, I think the script at hand, the actual story at hand, is a lot of fun to watch because for the first half of this movie, it is exactly what the trailers pitch it. It is this character trying to weasel himself out of this very tense situation where all the cops are surrounding this entire venue, and it's really fun to see how smart this character is in terms of trying to figure out a way out. And yeah, sure, there's a lot of conveniences in this movie, especially when it comes to the radio comms, which I'll get into in a second here, but either way, I was just having a lot of fun with the general premise of this movie. That's, it's exactly what they sold you in the trailer, and it's just as fun as it looked in the trailer. One of my favorite characters in the entire first half of this movie is Jonathan Langdon as the vendor, as Jamie, who is some random guy who works at this, concert venue, and he's selling t-shirts, and you have a very awkward and clunky dialogue scene where, Josh Hartnett's character decides, oh, we'll let this other girl have the size of the t-shirt instead of my daughter because we're going to be very nice, and then he kind of becomes friends with this vendor just really quickly, and this vendor just is spilling the beans about everything. And again, I do think that in terms of the dialogue in this film, with how clunky it is, there's a lot of dialogue sequences where I feel like it has to be intentional with, I guess M Night Shyamalan just having fun with the dialogue here, especially when it comes to the Gen Z lingo that he plays with at the beginning of the film, with the idea of crispy being the new term for something being cool. Like there's something very tongue-in-cheek about the way that he writes his dialogue that's, at least me, for an audience member, I think it's the funniest thing ever. I just eat that shit up. And so when it comes to this random guy just spilling all the beans about the security in this entire venue, I thought it was absolutely hilarious. And again, there has to be some sort of intention to this. I can't imagine that M Night Shyamalan sat at his desk, typing out this script and thought, oh, this dialogue is so clever and smart, because at a certain degree, I think the script at large, again, the way that Josh Hartnett's character is, very clever in terms of how he's getting out of the situation, I do think a lot of that stuff is pretty clever, is pretty smart, but the dialogue at itself just is very tongue-in-cheek and goofy at times, and there's a lot of jokes in this movie that I think really do land, and I have to believe that it is intentional, because if it's not intentional, maybe it makes it even funnier, but even still, I had a blast with this random character. I thought he was so funny, and the fact that he's in the post-credit scene of him, talking to Josh Hartnett about being, a massive fan. He follows the true crime of the butcher, and he's very invested in this case in general, and the fact that he's talking to the butcher in this opening scene just makes it so much funnier, and the fact that the post-credit scene has him freaking out about, like, oh, I met the guy, I was an accomplice to him escaping, is the funniest thing ever. So again, that stuff has to be intentional. I truly cannot believe that Shyamalan was unaware about how funny these things were, because I thought they were hilarious. But all of this is to say that Cooper is trying to get a security badge. He's trying to get a radio in terms of the employee, access, so he can hear exactly what is going on the police side of things. And so he can kind of get an idea of what their plan actually is and what this trap actually is. And, I found a lot of this stuff to be extremely convenient. I think in terms of the script, in terms of the dialogue, I think this is some of the worst stuff. In terms of when he goes over to the fire alarm and he's like, okay, I'm going to pull this fire alarm. I'm going to create chaos and that'll help me escape. Well, then he hears on the radio immediately when he's about to do that, that's, this woman that is, running the entire show. She's the one behind all of this. She has a lot of the very direct expositional type of dialogue in these radio sequences where she's like, oh, he's going to want to pull the fire alarm to create chaos, right? When, Josh Hartnett is about to pull the fire alarm to create chaos. And so there's a lot of conveniences when it comes to that. But again, I can push past all that because I was having fun in general watching this character. Like, okay, it makes sense for him to want to pull the fire alarm to escape in the chaos, but if you take that away from this character, now what is he going to do? It makes the entire situation a little bit more interesting. He knows that possibly getting backstage is going to be a good way to get out. He knows that, going through the chaos of all these people, escaping might be a good way out. He knows that maybe the rooftop is a good way to escape, but there's people on the rooftop. And so there's many sequences in this movie, in this first half, that is, watching the gears turn in his head of trying to figure out some way out. And as it progresses, you see this character who is very calm and collected at the beginning of this story gets a little more tense as things go on, but as soon as he gets control back again, you can see his temper just completely change and see that, he's back to his, confident self, and he's going to get out of this situation no matter what, because he finds out that, in these Lady Raven concerts, there's always a young girl who is selected in the audience that's going to go up on stage and sing and dance alongside Lady Raven, which is a really cool idea because it gives this character a chance to be able to try to get backstage if he can get them to select his daughter. And this leads us to possibly one of my favorite M. Night Shyamalan cameos of all time, because it has so many layers of comedy to it. Because for one, it's M. Night Shyamalan making cameo in an M. Night Shyamalan film. All those scenes are always really fun to see in his movies because he always gives himself a very integral role, which is hilarious. The fact that he puts himself into such an important role in his movies, and this role is this guy who is apparently the uncle of Lady Raven. He's not the father of Lady Raven, even though in real life it is, his daughter being, the performer on stage. And he even has a line here that I thought was so incredibly funny, where it's like, yeah, I'm her uncle, I'm her mother's brother. Yes, I know what an uncle is. He did have to explain that to me, but there's something about that one has to be, maybe it's not intentional. I actually don't know if that was an intentional joke in this, but I thought it was hilarious. But the fact that, this character is going to, try to guilt trip, M. Night Shyamalan's character to selecting his daughter as the one that will go up on stage, I thought was a clever idea. Again, dialogue aside, I do think that this is a very clever idea because once he does get on stage with his daughter and his daughter's up there singing, dancing, and having fun, you can see that he has some sort of joy of seeing his daughter in this very happy side, but then you also see the opposite side, the other version of himself that is scheming, that is trying to get out of this situation in any way possible by, getting the trust of everybody else around him. There's this girl who walks up that is about to pass out, and he catches her and takes her into the back tent. And, even these different, medical people in the background are like, oh, this guy's a gem. What, can we have him? Can he be like a volunteer and help us out with all these things? Just gaining the trust of everybody else around him. It's very smart. Again, it's the more show don't tell stuff in this movie that I thought was a lot more clever than the dialogue itself. But again, I do think that all of it works in a very Shyamalan type way. But at this point, we're probably about 45 minutes into this film, which means we're reaching the midpoint, and Saleka Shyamalan, Lady Raven, is, performing her final song for a concert with, I believe, Kid Cudi is the other performer in this movie, making his little cameo in this movie as somebody that's just really rude to his assistant, which I'm sure that's some inside joke between Shyamalan and his daughter about how maybe she dealt with somebody in the real music industry that was like this, which I'm sure that happens all the time. But I thought it was a very odd, misplaced, but really funny moment in this entire movie, which again, it's a Shyamalan movie, that stuff happens all the time. But either way, my mind is absolutely racing because I have no idea where this movie is going to go at this point, because I was under the assumption that this entire movie is going to take place inside of this concert venue. And so really there's two options where this movie can go. You can either have this entire situation where everybody else in this concert venue leaves for the night, and it's just going to be Josh Hartnett and his daughter trapped in this, entire concert venue, alone with a bunch of police, or you can have him somehow get out of this entire situation and you have the rest of the movie take place outside of the concert venue, which again, I was under the assumption that the whole thing was going to take place here inside of the venue. And so when he pulls Saleka Shyamalan off on the side, because essentially at the end of her concert, she goes to the girl that was chosen in the audience and kind of says her goodbyes to her and has this entire emotional moments with her. And, they move on, they go through the final security through the back door, talking to a bunch of police officers, and then they're finally able to leave. But then you get into a situation where obviously Josh Hartnett's character does not want to talk to any security whatsoever. And the only person that he can escape with is Lady Raven, because nobody's going to go to her very closely to question the people that she is around, because that is the inner circle of this entire concert venue that is trusted. And so the movie does something that I was entirely not expecting whatsoever, is that when Josh Hartnett pulls her off on the side, he reveals to her that he is the butcher and that he has somebody on his phone that he can, press this button, release a bunch of carbon monoxide, and kill him if she does not do what he wants her to do. And so at this point, I'm having a lot of fun with this movie, but it does kind of have a repetitive pace to it. It has, a scene where Cooper is with his daughter inside of the concert venue. Then, they're listening to some music. You have some concert photography of Saleka Shyamalan, being a performer on stage, which is all great and all. And then you have Josh Hartnett to go out, try to find a way out, doesn't find a way out, ends up back inside of the concert venue listening to Saleka Shyamalan sing another song, and it's kind of that rinse and repeat for the first 45 minutes of this film. But at this point, at the midpoint of the film, I thought the movie got so much more interesting, because now you have another character pulled into the situation who now knows that the main character is the butcher, and you have another character that's now trying to get out of this situation. Because again, for the first half of the movie, I'm kind of rooting for Josh Hartnett, because I kind of want to see how he's going to escape this, and I kind of want to see how he's going to get out of this trap that was set for him. But now at this point in the movie, now I'm rooting for Saleka Shyamalan to try to catch this guy, because I do want this guy to get caught, because he is a murdering psychopath. And so I thought it was a very clever handoff from, rooting for Josh Hartnett for the first half of the movie now to rooting for Saleka Shyamalan in the second half of this movie, because this character was awesome. I love the fact that she was put in these situations where now you have her, this little girl who has no idea that her father is a butcher, and you have the butcher himself who is, threatening to kill this random guy, and that she is now responsible for the life of somebody else, the life of this little girl, and her own life as well inside of this limousine, and you're now being brought out somewhere. And she's kind of playing a game of chess where you don't really know what she's going to do. She decides that, oh, we'll drop you off directly at your home, which gets her even closer to the life of Josh Hartnett's character, to, revealing to, his family that he is the butcher. And so there's a lot of great tense moments where these characters just know more than the little girl or the rest of the family in these scenes. That just adds a lot of tension to this movie at hand. And again, I really have no idea how this movie is going to pull this off, because again, this is all uncharted territory that wasn't in the trailers. And so I'm so incredibly enthralled by the storytelling here, which again, maybe I am biased being a massive Shyamalan fan that can get past some of the bad dialogue in the beginning of the movie, because I was still having fun with the goofiness of all that. But once we get into the actual tension-filled sequences of this movie, he does a really, we forget that Shyamalan is a fantastic filmmaker, and he knows how to, put our characters in very tense situations to ramp up that tension for an audience with both the music, the cinematography, the performances, all this stuff I think really clicked at this midpoint of the movie. That's when Saleka Shyamalan decides to, go into their home and to, play a song on the piano for the daughter, and Josh Hartnett is kind of looming above her with his phone recording a video, but you also know that that phone has the ability to kill this random guy that is in some random basement. The entire sequence was really fun and thrilling, and the fact that she just grabs his phone and runs off into the bathroom was like, okay, now we're doing this. We're revealing all this to the family. She's screaming through the door that's, the butcher is their father, and she's now going to use that her fan base on a live stream to try to get them to figure out where this other character is, which I thought was a very clever way to use her fame and popularity through an Instagram live type of situation to try to find the victim, to try to save him before Josh Hartnett can get into this bathroom. I thought this entire sequence was probably my favorite scene in the entire film. I thought all of that stuff was brilliant. And quite frankly, I think the dialogue from this point on in the movie gets so much better. I think that these conversations that's Cooper has with Lady Raven, and all this tense sequences where they're in the car together and they're having these discussions, and even at the point where once the door is finally opened and Cooper goes to confront her, now she is the new prisoner of this character, and he's going to take her out to the car, and he puts his hand on her shoulder. It's like, it's very important that my hand stays on your shoulder, and it's because I can feel the tenseness in your shoulder to like, okay, don't do that. I can feel that you're planning on moving your arm to grab some weapon against me. I can tell that you're going to do something. I thought all that dialogue was really interesting, it was so good compared to everything else in the first half of the movie, which makes me think that the first half of the movie was very intentional with how goofy the dialogue was, because now the whole movie has a complete shift in tension, which I absolutely loved. And I really love Josh Hartnett's performance as his character, because you can tell that he's very much struggling in these two lives of his. He has a very calm, cool, and collected, serial killer that's very smart, that's going to get out of these situations, but as things become more intense, you can feel that facade kind of fade away, and you can feel this unhinged nature behind his eyes, the twitch that he has, the nervousness that he, invokes to all the characters around him when he is, about to get caught in all of these scenes. I thought he was absolutely horrifying in those sort of moments. I really loved his performance in general in this film. I think he very much knew the movie that he was in. He very much knew what Shyamalan wanted of him for this role, and I thought he absolutely nailed it in these sequences. But of course, when the garage opens and his family is standing out there, and Saleka Shyamalan is slowly able to get out of the car and also stand in front, where the only thing that he can do right now in order to escape is just drive through the entire family. And he's not going to do that because he does have some love for his kids. He does have some love for his wife, but he's trapped here now. He's now trapped inside of his own house because now the police have arrived. He closed the garage door, and now he's in there while the family is all outside. And of course, once the police is surrounding the entire place, of course he has a contingency plan. Of course he got out somehow, and he got into some of the police gear, and he's kind of in disguise again, once again in the background, and he takes, the limousine with Lady Raven inside of it to this other undisclosed location. Now she's trapped once again, handcuffed into the limousine. And again, I thought all this stuff was really fun and clever. I really loved the ride this movie's going on because, of course, when the guy got into the limousine and started driving off, I was like, yeah, that's going to be Josh Hartnett. I know for a fact that he had some way out of the house. He's very clever. He's very smart. He had to have some sort of contingency to get out of the situation to go ahead and kidnap Lady Raven once again. I love all that stuff. And again, you play with the fact that she is some big megastar and she rolls down the window and all the fans swarm this limousine and he's now trapped inside this limousine once again with no way out. And so you're always putting this character into these tense situations where you're kind of rooting for both situations. You're rooting for Josh Hartnett to somehow get out of this impossible situation that he's in, but you're also rooting for Lady Raven to also get out of this tense situation because you actually are rooting for her as a character because she has been very clever and very smart throughout this entire thing. But of course, Josh Hartnett is able to escape one more time and disguise himself as a fan of Lady Raven inside of the crowd once the police tell the crowd to kind of back away from the limousine. I thought that was a great moment for him to be able to get out of this situation. Again, I thought all these little small moments here are very clever. And again, I don't really have any problem with the dialogue in the entirety of this back half of the movie. I thought the first half was really goofy and maybe intentional. The second half is incredibly tense. I absolutely loved all this stuff, and eventually, since he was not inside a limousine, he was able to escape in this moment. He goes back home to have a conversation with his wife, and that is where the Shyamalan twist happens in this movie, which, hell yeah, Shyamalan is back. I was not expecting this, and I absolutely loved it. But that's not to say that this twist in this movie is like a massive twist that recontextualizes everything like Sixth Sense did with Bruce Willis being dead the entire time. Like, that twist is revolutionary. It is such a big twist, and every time you watch that movie back again, it recontextualizes the entire thing. I don't think the twist here is as grand scale as that, but it was still one that fit in this story that wasn't over the top to a point where it didn't fit in this story anymore. It wasn't some supernatural twist. It wasn't some really out there bizarre thing. It was a very grounded idea that it was actually his wife who sold him out this entire time, and it was very well written. I think that of every single scene, of every single dialogue sequence throughout this entire movie, I think the scene with Lady Raven and Cooper in the car was great, but I think this one is even better. You're told at the beginning of the movie that the police knew he was at this concert because he made a mistake. He left a torn receipt of, buying the concert tickets inside of one of his safe houses that was, taken over by the police, and so that is how they knew that he was going to be here at, this concert venue, and that is how they set the entire trap. That is the inciting incident that led the police to try to find the butcher character. That is the piece of evidence that brought them all as close as they did to finding Cooper. And you find out that the wife was actually suspicious of him over the past few months. Maybe she thought, he was having an affair, but something didn't quite feel right about it being an affair. So she was like, okay, maybe it's something else. And she just did all these thinking. And it was the smell of like this, the cleaning chemicals on his clothes. That was the thing that really hammered home the idea that there's something off with this guy, and she needs to find some truth behind it, and she is suspicious of him because she followed him one day to one of these safe houses, and this safe house is not a place where he keeps any of his victims. It's just a place where he can, I guess, kind of shut down to plan, to just really think to himself, and that is why she went over there, made an anonymous call, left the torn receipts on the ground for the police to find, and she was essentially doing all this not because she knew that he was the butcher, but it was, I guess, a way to confirm whether or not he was. If I'm being honest, I had more of an audible reaction watching the twists and turns of this movie and just the entertaining, the laugh out loud, I guess, times where I was just laughing at this movie's dialogue, whether it was intentional or not. I had a larger reaction to this film than I did with Deadpool and Wolverine. I was eating this movie up like crazy. And it's not to say that this is a better movie than Deadpool and Wolverine, because it really isn't, but at least for me personally, with my bias of loving Shyamalan, this is an S-tier Shyamalan movie. I loved how corny the dialogue was. I loved how this movie was shot. I loved the tension and the suspense of this movie. I loved the twists and turns that this movie took, with him revealing to Lady Raven that he was the butcher to add so much more tension and stakes to the story, to it leading to his home, to him, being able to escape all these situations, to the very ending of the film, which is him, having this weird quirks to him, which is very OCD, where, he straightens up the towel, and so it makes sense that he would want to stop in the driveway to, set up this bicycle and put it stand up because it fell over in all the chaos of the police raiding his home. That made sense for him character-wise to be able to do that, but once he does get into the police van, he reveals that he has a little spire from the tire of the bicycle, and he's going to use that to get out of his handcuffs, and he just starts laughing maniacally at the very end of this movie inside of the police van. That was awesome. Give me a sequel to this movie right now, because that was so funny. But really, I just had a blast watching this movie, and I think it's incredibly easy for you as an audience member who is not maybe as big of a Shyamalan fan as I am to go into this movie taking it way too seriously, because I think if you go into this movie expecting a very serious, tense, horror thriller, I think you will be disappointed, because at least the way I would pitch this movie is as a thriller comedy, with the comedy being a lot more intentional than it was unintentional, at least in my mind. And so I had a blast watching this movie as a Shyamalan fan. It is everything that I wanted out of a modern Shyamalan movie, and really he has three different eras. He has his OG era between, Sixth Sense to The Village. I think all those movies are really great. I think that's the top tier of his filmmaking abilities. And then he has his middle tier, which is, or I guess the middle era, which is just a really bad era, the era where he had a lot bigger budget with Last Airbender, with After Earth, with The Happening, and all those films that are just completely atrocious that made him the laughingstock of Hollywood. And then you have the modern era of Shyamalan, which is basically from The Visit onward. And I love The Visit. I think that movie is a really solid horror thriller while also having a lot of comedic moments in that movie as well, along with, Split, which was great, and then you have Glass, which is not so great. And again, the varying quality of Old to Knock at the Cabin to now this movie, your opinion on his filmography, at least his modern Shyamalan films, is going to vary between person to person. But at least for me, in terms of this modern era of Shyamalan, I think this is my favorite besides Split, because I had a blast watching this movie in a very different way than I had a blast watching Split. But either way, I was laughing my ass off during this movie. I was very tense watching this movie. I just had the most fun I've ever had in theaters this entire year watching M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. And I'm very curious to hear what you guys thought in the comment section down below, because again, this movie is probably going to be controversial. It is a Shyamalan movie. I have no idea what critics have said about this movie because I got to watch it early, so I have no idea what the Rotten Tomatoes score is going to be. I have no idea what the audience, members are going to think walking out of this film. They could absolutely hate it. I could be the one person in the world that loves this movie, but even if I am, that's okay, because I love movies. I love Shyamalan, and this was everything I wanted from an M. Night Shyamalan movie. But that's going to be it for my thoughts and my review for M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. Again, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I just reviewed Oddity, which is a really weird horror movie that came out, a couple weeks ago, which I would highly recommend if you want an actual horror thriller that is extremely terrifying in a lot of ways. I also reviewed Deadpool and Wolverine, which is a great movie as well, along with, Twisters. Please watch my Twisters review, because I do think that YouTube hates Glenn Powell for some reason, because my two, least performing videos in the past few months have been Twisters and Hitman. Apparently YouTube hates Glenn Powell, so go check out those reviews as well. But either way, that's going to be it from me for this video. Again, leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one.